A while back. We're kind of revisiting what to do there now, but we have a farm in Acton, California, just outside of Los Angeles, one in Watkins Glen, New York, in the Finger Lakes region. There's wineries, waterfalls. It's a beautiful area. We have overnight accommodations. We're in the process of building a cafe there this year. It's going to be a vegan cafe, so we can demonstrate what you can eat and demonstrate the solutions. We started out by investigating factory farms to document conditions with this idea that if we showed people how bad it was, people would stop eating animals. And I think that can play a role when people see how bad it is, but it's a lot more complicated. We have a whole food system, we have an infrastructure that incentivizes the food system and the sicknesses we currently experience in this country. So it's a lot more complicated than just people making a conscious switch, although that can play a role. So we work to stop some of the worst cruelties, but we also believe we need to create solutions. So we're putting a lot of energy now in advocacy to a resource-based approach to systems change. So there's land is a big resource. There are perverse incentives out there for this land to be used to grow crops to feed animals for factory farms. The factory farming industry gets government money to clean up the messes that they create. Now, those are all external costs that they need to be held accountable for. So we can start making the industry pay for the harms it causes and start putting government dollars, literally billions of dollars a year, to invest in plant-based agriculture. We can start seeing a shift. It's going to take time, but that's an area where we're very involved now. The Farm Bill, which comes up for conversation every 5 or so years, is being discussed right now in Washington, D.C. It will allocate about $700 billion. So we're going to try to shift some of that towards plant-based agriculture, towards investments in alternatives to animal foods, and also to support small farmers. Oftentimes, small farms struggle going up against the big factory farming industry, and they get pushed out of business by the big factory farms. If we can provide pathways for small farms, such as dairy farms, right? In New York State, there's a lot of older dairy farmers who want to retire, and their kids don't want to take over the farm. So what do? The big factory farm buys it up, or it goes to development. If we can create a pathway for that land to stay in agriculture, to grow plants instead of animals, and to create a healthier food system, a healthier job, frankly, for the farmers, it'd be a beautiful thing. So we had a bill introduced in New York State called the Farmer Opportunity Bill, because we're not against farmers, we're against cruelty. And we want to create opportunities. So this bill that we had introduced, and we're going to get it introduced again, it'll take a while probably for it to get any wings and move forward, but it takes a farmland preservation grant program that spends $30 million a year for farmland preservation in New York State. Most of that goes to factory farm dairies, so it's been used essentially to consolidate the big dairies. This bill would take that $30 million and shift it towards community-centered plant-based agriculture. And so we think that's a much healthier form of agriculture. So that's some of the policy work we're doing. But we started out by seeing animals suffering and trying to help them. And one of our most important qualities and principles at farm sanctuaries is to speak to people where they are on their own journeys, which requires an empathy to understand where people are on their own journeys. In our early days, we would be pretty critical of farmers and frankly had a fairly limited understanding of the struggles farmers and workers are going through. I think we have a more mature, more holistic approach to the system that is creating these horrible jobs that people really don't like. I just read recently a 16-year-old kid was killed died in a factory farm, a poultry slaughterhouse from some of the equipment I think that he got stuck in. So this is a system that is very harmful to workers, to animals, and to consumers. It's been estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs in this country by shifting to a whole food plant-based diet. 10 times more land in this country goes to animal agriculture to feed animals as opposed to feeding people. We could feed people far more efficiently with less land or less resources with plant-based agriculture. The Colorado River was recently in the news because the western states are fighting for that limited supply of water. What wasn't in the headlines as much as it should have been is the fact that most of that Colorado River water goes for animal agriculture, to irrigate crops, to feed farm animals. So that's an incredibly inefficient use of that scarce resource. So as time goes, hopefully there'll be more conversations about how we can live more efficiently, more healthfully, without causing unnecessary harm. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create that kind of a world. And our sanctuaries are models for that. But so there's system change, and then there's personal change. And we are social animals. So when I was at Cornell University, I went there as a vegan, and I studied agricultural economics to get an understanding of animal agriculture. And I remember I was in this one class where they were teaching pre-vet students about animal care practices. And so we went into the pig barn, and there were 2 mother pigs, each had about 10 babies with them in these farrowing crates. And the teacher showed us routine farming procedures, such as ear notching, which is where they cut chunks out of their ears, tail docking, where they cut off their tails without any painkillers. And so the teacher, is showing us these practices. He reaches into the pen, pulls out a piglet, and cuts off the tail, notches the ear. The piglet is screaming, the piglet is bleeding, and the students are visibly squeamish about this. It's hard to watch, and they're empathizing with this pig. And then the teacher says, "Who wants to try this?" Nobody wanted to. Students were looking down, trying not to get the eye contact with the teacher, but eventually one of the young students stepped forward, tried his hand at this, then a second student did it, and each time a student stepped forward, that initial resistance drained away. And it really speaks to how we have I think a natural empathy, but how it can sometimes be squashed. And I think that's one of the reasons that the veterinary profession, a lot of veterinarians go in because they care about animals, but when you go into vet school and you're made to do these mean things to other animals, it normalizes it. And then when you're doing something you don't feel good about, you got to come up with a reason. So like at Cornell, this teacher was saying, we're doing this for their own good, which, is a heck of a rationalization, but the reasoning was, we cut off their tails because in these farms, they'll bite each other's tails. And they will, but it's because they're in this cruel system where there's nothing else to do. So they're driven to this sort of neurotic behavior. They say they notch their ears because we can identify who they are. They do it for identification. A certain part of the ear means a certain number. And we do this so we can monitor their health and well-being. And then, so after watching this happen on one day, a day or two later we came back. We're in the same barn. And in each of these pens, there was the mother pig. There's only 1 or 2 piglets now. There were not 10 in each pen anymore. And we asked, what happened to the piglets? And they all the ones that weren't there had died. They bled to death. And so this teacher, instead of saying, maybe I shouldn't have notched the ears too deeply, because I remember when he did it, he said, I like to notch them really deeply. It kind of just hit me wrong. Instead of saying, maybe I shouldn't have done it that way, or maybe we shouldn't have cut their tails off and notched the ears at the same time, or maybe we shouldn't do it at all, instead of any of those kind of possible ideas, there's a problem with the pigs. There's a genetic problem. We're going to call it Pig IG, Pig Improvement Company, because it's a genetic problem. He didn't even take responsibility for this harm, but then blamed it on the pigs. It's sort of, so anyway, we often like to see ourselves as the rational animal, but it's, I think, more accurate to say we're rationalizing animals. And we tend to rationalize if we're doing something we don't feel good about. And we come up with reasons why we have to do it. So we have to eat meat for protein. Actually, we don't, right? So that's one of those myths. We need to drink cow's milk for calcium. No, we don't. Another myth. And so one of the things we do at Farm Sanctuary is challenge people to think through these myths and ultimately make choices and live in a way that is better aligned with our own humanity, with our own empathy, with our own compassion, and with our own interests, our own health and well-being. So I'll just, I think, Gigi wanted to say something about a visit to Farm Sanctuary, and after she says it, I'll say a few more things and be happy to talk about any questions or things people want to talk about, but she asked me if she could just talk about her experience, right? Yeah, thank you. I think she visited our sanctuaries and wanted to just sort of share her experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Gigi, and so back in 1998 I was living in Houston, Texas, and I read an article about the factory farms, but I didn't know anything about the dairy industry, so I became vegetarian. And then in 2014, I made my first visit to Farm Sanctuary in Orland, and I remember the tour guide was asking who's vegan, who's vegetarian, and I said I'm vegetarian, and he said, well, how come you're not vegan? And I said, I don't know. And they said, do you know what happens with the babies? And I said, no. And then I learned about the dairy industry, how they take the babies away from the moms, and it just broke my heart. So right then and there, I became vegan, and I'm so thankful for Farm Sanctuary, because I wouldn't have gone, I would have never known about that. So
nice, thank you. Yeah. I think there's that quote, when we know better, we can do better. Right, so a big part of what we try to do is just provide the information. At the end of the day, everybody has to make their own choice. But we grow up with certain beliefs and certain assumptions. And I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, does this make sense? And if you look at animal agriculture, it's one of the top contributors to the climate crisis, contributes more than the entire transportation industry. It's one of the top contributors to the loss of biodiversity. There was this study done a little bit ago, a survey maybe 5 years ago. They looked at the animals living on Earth. And when they looked at the mammals on Earth, what they found was that only 4% of the mammals currently live in the wild. 96% are domesticated, mainly farm animals. And humans are a significant part too. So we're destroying the earth and destroying habitats. We're cutting down rainforests to graze animals or to grow crops to feed animals. Completely inefficient, right? And so hopefully some of these issues that people are paying attention to, like the climate crisis, Colorado River water, can be more regularly connected with our food system, which is probably our most profound relationship we have with the earth, and it's not one that is beneficial to the earth, and ultimately it's not beneficial to us. And people who live near factory farms, literally they have manure spewed into the air that gets onto their houses. So that's another form of injustice and disrespect that this industry reeks of. But when you cause harm to somebody else, and when you say it's okay and you start making excuses for it, and you lose that empathy, that sort of pattern can then play out not only with how we treat other animals, but how we treat other people. And I think when we lose our empathy, we lose a really important part of our humanity. And so, really it's about living with kindness, learning from mistakes. And often we learn a lot more from mistakes than from not making mistakes. And which I think, I guess, good and bad news. The good news is, the bad news too is we've made a lot of really big mistakes. So we can learn. And I think that there's now a very strong desire and more awareness. And so anyway, I guess I'll just leave it at that and say a huge thank you for y'all being here. And if anybody wants to ask questions or want to talk about anything in particular, I'm more than happy to do that. I don't want to... my book, yeah. I'm happy to sign the book here.
Bestseller, fabulous book. Please get it.
Yeah, it speaks about the history of the organization, how we started, about the issues, and it's still very relevant today.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dean, so much. Jean. Happy birthday to you. Please come and get this book. I'll be right here. Oh, I'll be right there. And you come get the books, okay? Also, I made a birthday cake. I should not be a baby. I don't do cakes well. But what I brought is here. And you're going to try a piece of it, a little one, okay? But it looks kind of like it's going to fall apart because it's loose. But I tried. Yes, you get a little piece. Okay. So anyway, anybody have questions for Jean?
I have a company in Uganda, very big in agriculture. In fact, they have a university called Get Healthy University. They're really focused on poultry. And I'm trying to convince them that hydroponics is an alternative to...
Good.
It's a long
We
path.
should be in touch. You know, if you have a card, give me your card. Animal agriculture is really pushing for export markets, right? In Africa especially. So we should talk about that. It's a big problem, and I've been thinking a lot lately about how relationships are between people and other animals, people and people, countries, and oftentimes relationships have been based on extraction, where somebody's taking from somebody else, right? When it comes to animals, we're taking. And sometimes businesses, don't have the greatest relationships externally in other parts of the world. So creating mutuality and self-resilience is important. But animal agriculture is doing a lot right now to kind of get into other places, and it's a real concern. So yeah, please, let's be in touch.
Do you have any camps for teenagers or kids that watch them play and have them at work? Because a lot of people would love to send them.
Do we have camps for kids at our farms? We used to, and I think we're going to bring them back. It's wonderful when you have kids come out and sleep under the stars and be at a sanctuary. So we have done that in the past, and I think we will like to start doing it again.
Because I got to feel sales.
Have you seen this report that came
So
out
maybe
from
right down
MIT
here or
New York
something.
University about America, the way their food practices regarding meat are getting us closer to the pandemic?
Yes, I did hear about that report. Yes, how animal agriculture, factory farming, confining animals together is like a breeding ground for disease, increasing the risk of pandemics, like COVID, for instance. Now, what the industry will say, again, it's always not my fault. They're blaming it on wild animals. So I don't believe that. Now, it's possible that some wild animals may carry things, but factory farms are like industrial, it's souped up, So, but yes, I did see that. It was a very well-researched report, from my understanding, well-respected, talking about how factory farming contributes to pandemics.
And also the encroachment of land used for animal agriculture encroaches on wild land, which then brings the wild animals into the mix of the factory farm animals, and it goes directly in our food supply.
Yes.
And the people around it. So
So there's a few ways, right? So when we're cutting down rainforests, so we're creating actually less diversity, which means less health and well-being, and then also coming into contact with diseases that then get into domesticated animals. But I think the best thing in many cases, just to let ecosystems and biodiversity flourish instead of taking, and to create healthy ecosystems. But also on factory farms, something that is also sometimes people talk about but not enough. Most of the antibiotics used in the United States are fed to farm animals, which results in the development of antibiotic-resistant pathogens and new zoonotic diseases. There's COVID, and the origins of that are still some are debating. But swine flu from 2009 originated on a factory pig farm. The Spanish flu during World War I originated in poultry. So a lot of these, it was called the Spanish flu, not like bird flu at the time, although we're also in the midst of a bird flu pandemic that's killed over 50 million birds in this country so far, and many more around the world, and it's killed some people too. It's called avian influenza, high pathogenic avian influenza. So these diseases, the more they're out there, the more likely they are to evolve and then to jump the species barrier. But factory farming is a breeding ground for disease.
Gene, I just wanted to thank you for being such a voice of reason and a source of really useful knowledge for the vegan community and beyond. You're my rock. Like, you're someone who does meet people where they are and is more persuasive because of it. And it's hard, as you know, all the suffering you see, to learn how to process it. And I've just found just your social media posts alone have been really helpful for me to be able to do that, because unless I can process the suffering, I'm not going to be the activist I want to be.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate that. And, we started out, as I mentioned, by doing investigations and seeing terrible things, seeing animals suffering, and in a sense being traumatized ourselves, right? So rescuing animals was one part of healing, and watching the animals heal was a big part of it. But for a sanctuary, you got to be careful because you can't rescue your way out of this problem, right? So it's this balance of doing what you can, but then telling the stories, but then processing and healing from the things we're seeing and the difficult, ugly realities we have to sometimes be aware of. But it's important to be aware, and the way that I've sort of kept doing this for so long is, it's really what do you focus on, right? And we spent a lot of time in our early years focusing on the bad stuff. And there's still a lot of bad stuff. We still need to educate people about it. But I think we want to dwell in the good stuff. Dwell in the sanctuary, not in the slaughterhouse, right? Dwell in the solutions, eating the plant-based foods and the healthy things. Do what we can do. And even if it's a small thing, take heart from any small improvement. Because small things over time build up and lead to big changes. So, but I appreciate you saying that, and it's just, we found that it's speaking to people where they are, being truthful about the complexity and the challenges here is important, because it's not simple at all. And everybody is complicated, People do things for different reasons, and we just need to try to understand and empathize with why people are doing what they're doing. I remember having a meal once with Jane Goodall, and she was talking, we were talking about like poaching of wild animals, of primates in the jungles, right? And my early activist mindset would have been, oh, those terrible people doing that terrible thing to those poor animals, right? But these are people that are trying to make a living, trying to survive when sometimes the forest has been cut down around them. They don't have many opportunities. So instead of just criticizing those folks, create opportunities for those folks. Like growing coffee, for example, shade-grown coffee in some of these areas. So that was an idea of a solution. And so working with farmers, instead of saying, oh, farmers are whatever, look, farmers are just trying to get by. Many of them are really struggling. And they're told, poultry growers are the kind of headline for this. These contract poultry growers, often people like in the southeast have some land but don't have a lot else going for them. So a big poultry integrator like Tyson or one of these big factory farm conglomerates comes, look, we'll guarantee you a check every month if you raise our chickens. So the farmer says, sure, sounds good. So the farmer takes out a loan to build buildings to the specifications of Tyson on his own property. Now he's paying off his loan, and he's dependent on Tyson for those chickens. And not only, so he's providing the capital, he's providing the labor, his land is getting polluted. So Tyson has externalized all those costs on this guy. And then this person now is dependent on Tyson. And if they don't do what Tyson says, the contract ends. And they've got these debts they have to pay. So that's an example of what happens and how people end up on these treadmills. And a lot of farmers are on these treadmills doing things that they don't necessarily feel very good about, that they don't know how to get out of. So if we can figure out pathways, again, for like these small dairy farms, for example, poultry, contract growers, or what's really good is there's a lot of young people now interested in agriculture, believe it or not. I think they're kind of interested in getting back to the land, living in a way that's more, that feels better. And so there's a lot of young folks that are very interested in a new kind of agriculture. And what I would love also is farm workers who've traditionally been very much exploited, create opportunities for them to become business owners and entrepreneurs. These are folks that have skills, right? So creating structural opportunities and mechanisms for this kind of new food system that is one that is predicated on mutuality, sustainability, justice, and where we can feed ourselves without causing so much harm. Again, most people I think don't want to cause harm, you know, but we just kind of, even as consumers, we're kind of stuck in this machine, right? We go to McDonald's, you know, I'm in a hurry, so I do this. You know, and none of us is perfect, we all do the best we can, but when the convenient choice is the messed up, unhealthy choice, it's what a lot of people end up doing. So if we can create the convenient choice as a healthy, sustainable, kind choice, that's how we start creating big change systemically. There's personal change, but then there's systemic change. Both are very important. Yeah. What is the best way to reach children with this message? I think one of the best ways to reach anybody is with good vegan food, because people eat, all of us, and one of the biggest sort of obstacles for people to go plant-based is a fear. And one of the fears is, oh, what would I eat? Or, oh, I wouldn't like that food. So just showing people that there's this good food addresses this initial fear and this big obstacle, and then it opens the door to start talking more about bigger issues. And I would say that with kids, but also with adults. With kids, you know, whether to talk about slaughterhouses or not is sort of an open conversation. I don't have the answers to it. But I think just encouraging kids to live well, and I think actually kids sort of naturally have an empathy and naturally have a tendency to want to connect with other animals, you know, and we kind of knock it out of people. Sort of like those vet students I was mentioning at Cornell. There was a book a number of years ago, I think Harvey Diamond wrote it, and in the intro it said, if you put a kid in a room with a bunny rabbit and an apple, and if the kid eats the rabbit and plays with the apple, I'll give you a new car, right? The kid is going to play with the rabbit and eat the apple, right? Naturally, you're not going to go and tear up our, you know, we don't even have the claws to do it, if you think about it. Biologically, we're not well suited to kill other animals and eat them. And emotionally, to be able to do that, I think we have to undermine our empathy. So I think feeding the young person's natural empathy is huge, and providing plant-based options and instilling habits and addressing the fears that, oh, what would I eat? You know, I mean, I grew up eating McDonald's like everybody around me, right? So, in fact, I grew up in Hollywood, and as a kid, I did commercials for McDonald's, right? So I didn't even really know what the heck I was doing, right? You know, so it's where you grow up, what you grow up around. And I think being a good example is one of the most important things parents or older folks can do for younger folks. Just being a good example.
Probably your book, what was it that changed your mind?
Okay, what is it that changed my mind? The first thing was when I was in high school and my grandmother told me about how veal calves are raised. I said, I'm never eating veal. That was my first thing. But before that, as a young kid, I remember seeing wild animals in the neighborhood, like a deer that got stuck in a chain link fence in the neighbor's yard and was killed, and it just bothered me. A beautiful oak tree cut down so a house could be made bigger. It just viscerally bothered me. And I didn't want to be part of a system causing so much harm. And I wasn't really focused on factory farming immediately, but it was the veal issue. I learned about the environmental issues. I learned about more animal cruelty. And so it was really incremental for me. But it was learning about veal was the first thing. Any other things people are interested and curious about, or? Did I tell them how much water is used? I alluded to it. I mean, how the Colorado River, most of that goes for animal agriculture. And, you know, again, this is one of those areas where cow's milk uses tons of water. Now, as soon as almond milk starts selling, what do we hear? Almond milk uses a lot of water. Actually, cow's milk uses more water, right? So there's these narratives that start getting instilled. Or that one that, you know, you can't get enough protein from plants. That's not true either. So there's these stories that we're told, these narratives that we're told to maintain the status quo. So I think it's important just to be critical thinkers and recognize that part of the industrial farming industry we're up against falls over into the media marketing world as well. You know, to all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese. I mean, how many people have that in their brains, right? Right. So I mean, milk, it does the body good. Although they actually had to stop that because it was illegal. The milk mustache. Even on like just mainstream shows, you see commercials for things. Cottage cheese is now having a day because a lot of marketing that is very intentional on the part of industry, but it's just cultural for many people without seeing it, you know? So just being very much of a critical thinker and recognize that we're being bombarded by sales pitches that we don't necessarily see as sales pitches. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the effort is to get animal farmers off of producing animal products and get them into crop agriculture.
Yeah.
So that's a monumental task, and given the fact there must be over 1 million farmers in the U.S. alone, is there any concerted effort to transition?
Yes. The question has to do with helping farmers go from animal farming to plant farming. Is there a concerted effort? Yes, there's a concerted effort. Now, there are some folks working with individual farmers, and which is a very good thing. A lot of our focus has been on creating a different ecosystem, so farmers will have the incentives to go plant-based. You know, getting the money in that direction. So there are a number of organizations working on this. We're working with farmer groups as well. We had farmers supporting our Farmer Opportunity Bill in New York State. You know, so I think if we're going to work on an issue, it's important to be engaged with the constituents affected by that issue. So farmers are really important.
Now, is the Farm Bill addressing this problem?
The Farm Bill is not explicitly addressing the idea of transitioning agriculture. The way we get at it in the Farm Bill is using existing programs like SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food stamps. Billions of dollars go into that. And there is a small provision within it called the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentives Program, where if somebody takes a SNAP dollar and buys fruits and vegetables, they get 2 for the price of 1. So it incentivizes to buy fruits and vegetables, which is good for the consumer. It's good for farmers growing fruits and vegetables. But it's only applicable at farmers markets and in very limited locations. So we want to take that and apply it much more broadly. And it's about a $50 million a year program, which might sound like a lot, but in Washington, D.C. terms, it's peanuts. So we want to add to that and expand the nutrition incentives program so that SNAP dollars would be used more regularly to buy plant foods instead of animal foods and go to like legumes and whole grains, nuts, in addition to just fruits and vegetables. So, and not only at farmers markets, but also in grocery stores. So that's an idea, and so that's on the consumer side, but when you have those dollars floating into plant foods, you're going to inherently start creating more opportunities for farmers. So a big part of this, again, systemically, is to tilt things, even the playing field to begin with, because right now it's very much tilted towards factory farming, And we spend billions of dollars not only to subsidize growing cheap corn and soy, which is an animal feed, we spend money on cleaning up messes, like I was mentioning. Animal agriculture and all farmers really have preferential access to water and other scarce resources. They don't pay the same taxes as other businesses. They aren't covered by animal welfare laws. They're not covered by environmental laws. They're not covered by labor laws. That's why they have like kids working in these slaughterhouses sometimes. They have incarcerated people working in these slaughterhouses. So this is an industry that needs to be held accountable in so many ways. But with the Farm Bill, it's really about just where the money is spent and what we're incentivizing. So if we can start incentivizing more of a plant-based system and try to take money away from the factory farms. You know, another of their recent schemes is these methane digesters where on the surface it sounds good, but it's an example of greenwashing where they have factory farms with these big manure lagoons with animal waste. And it emits greenhouse gases, methane. And so the industry says, how about we capture that methane and turn it into energy? And on the surface that sounds good, right? There's this methane creating greenhouse gases, capture it. Okay, that makes some sense, but the fact is most of the greenhouse gases happen way before the manure lagoon. And we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in these digesters to capture that. So now we're creating an infrastructure and a dependency on these manure lagoons, and now we're creating a dependency on it, right? In California, hundreds of millions have been spent on methane digesters for dairy. It was part of some Enron money because there's an energy thing years ago, and Texas owed California money. That money went in with slush funds, the dairies got it. For these methane digesters and equipment manufacturers. So that's part of the machinery that we're up against. And the Farm Bill enables all kinds of businesses to profit that are not necessarily good for our country. So the Farm Bill is a real complicated thing. I mean, there's insurance issues, there's banking issues, there's access to money, access to capital. And the factory farms are very good at exploiting all of that. So it's a complicated, thousands of pages of language. And so I honestly don't understand it all. I have a general sense of the broad sweeps of it, but it's enabled this messed up system.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like our money being spent that way.
No, absolutely not. Well, it's not for our good.
And also the fact that kids can go out and buy fish sticks and cookies, really bad cookies. When you look at the labels of some of the things they have in the store, the label's like 50 ingredients long and full of chemicals and natural flavors which cause cancer, by the way. Anyway, I mean, it's just awful. And the kids can pick that out with the money we give them.
And the dairy industry is one of the worst. I mean, kids in schools are giving cows milk.
Yeah.
And we're subsidizing more milk production, and we have a glut of it. There's like 1 billion tons of cheese sitting in storage. Or maybe it's pounds. It's a lot of cheese. And we can't get rid of it. So, and we're producing more than we can use. And we keep investing more in that. Meanwhile, the average adult gets like 1/10 as many fruits and vegetables as they should. And we don't invest hardly anything in that. Right, so part of our conversation in Washington is, look, let's invest in the things we need and stop investing in the things we have too much of. So, but instead of that, we now push for export markets. So the USDA Secretary, Tom Vilsack, most USDA secretaries are not very good. He's less bad than many. When he was the secretary under Obama, he actually, pushed this White House organic garden, created this People's Garden program with USDA, encouraging local food, all good stuff. But that's more for show. The big money goes still to the dairy industry. Vilsack, between his stints under Obama and now under Biden, for that 4 years during that other president, he was the head of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. The U.S. Dairy Export Council. Now he's our USDA secretary. So just to give you a sense of kind of the culture there and what we're up against. Anyway, the dairy industry is one of the most entrenched.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's a lot to work through, but Bill Sack, you know, and his wife especially, is very into organic farming and into community gardens. And you know, they're doing some good things and they're saying good things, and that's a good sign. If somebody says a good thing, you build on it, you hold them accountable to it. So they're saying good things, so now we got to hold them accountable. So, yeah, is there any other questions or things people want to? Yeah.
Also, you mentioned that milk does the body good. That meme that we've heard so many times growing up. Why is it illegal? Or when did it become illegal? Because I don't know that part. And the reason I'm asking you this is because I went to a community meeting. And it was in a high school, and I just remember the poster in the lunchroom that said, milk, it does the body good.
Recently?
Yes, recently.
Wow.
And, you know, and it was one of these singers, I can't remember her name.
Yeah, a well-known celebrity probably.
Carrie Underwood.
Oh,
Yeah.
And so that's why I was curious,
So,
why that?
yeah, so the milk, it does the body good. I think it might have been an FCC or Federal Communications thing where it's not accurate because some bodies are intolerant and it actually hurts them. So there was some litigation and limitation on how that could be used. I think it might have been on the airwaves or something like that. But then it also comes down to enforcement, right? And it's possible that, like in a certain school district that's in a dairy area or whatever, or whose friends are dairy people, they'll put up the banner. And to give an idea, again, this is how culture and laws are interpreted. When, back in the early 90s here in California, there was a law on the books, a penal code section that required animals to have space to exercise.
Are we going to be sure?
So we thought this would apply to veal crates, to gestation crates, to battery cages, all of those cruel devices where animals are confined so they can't even stretch their limbs. I went to law enforcement people, nobody would enforce it. I found one law enforcement officer in Marin County who would have enforced it at a veal farm, and we couldn't find one. But it was on the books, technically illegal. But it was never enforced. So that's why we did the initiatives. First in 2008, we did Prop 2. 2018, we did Prop 12 to ban those confinement systems, and we won. And the industry was in court, and we ended up in the Supreme Court. We actually won that, thankfully, too. But the law, they say ownership is 9/10 of the law, right? So, I mean, a lot of it has to do with how much are you willing to fight. So in the case of the milk it does the body good, there was somebody fighting, you know, on the messaging stuff. But in that local district or where that banner is up, I don't know whether that particular case would apply there. But those are the conversation's underway now, right? What is appropriate to say? What is truthful? What is truthful? Because if you think about it, cow's milk is the perfect food for baby cows. It's not really the perfect food for people. So, you know, I think that these are all evolving. These are very culturally oriented issues.
So I worked for a school district as a teacher, and when I was researching for a nutrition education program that I'm starting, I was researching what does my district say about milk. And so it says on their website it linked resources to the USDA's Dairy Council, whatever.
Yep.
And so one of the FAQs was, what if my child, to parent, what if my child is allergic to milk? What should I do? And their 5 recommendations were, you know, drink less than milk, or drink lactose-free milk, or drink chocolate milk. It was, none of the suggestions were, don't drink milk, drink a dairy-free alternative. And I'm like, we are teaching our parents to continue feeding something that's harmful to lactose intolerant.
Absolutely. No, that's a very good example of how culture is sort of, this is instilled in. And the way the USDA works, U.S. Department of Agriculture, it's this massive agency based in Washington, D.C., but every state has at least one land-grant university. In New York, it's Cornell. Here, it's University of California. And then each of those land-grant universities have county cooperative extension agents. So there's this whole network of information dissemination. When I was at Cornell, Monsanto was doing research on bovine growth hormone with Cornell, the land-grant university. And then the story from the Cooperative Extension Agency is this will produce, increase your milk production. If you don't do it, you're going to be out of business. So then it gets sold informally, in a sense, through these networks. Maintaining and pushing out assumptions about what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to drink cow's milk. That's an assumption. And so but teachers, there's a student I think in California who's suing like a principal over free speech infringement because the student wanted to say, I don't do that, and I don't know the details of it, but it takes a fight. It takes a fight, and sometimes that's in court, and you got to be very thoughtful about it, But there are times to go to court and to fight for a principle, but you want to do it in a way where you got a good chance of winning because you don't want to create a bad precedent, So you want to do it thoughtfully. But just even knowing about that and just raising the question, maybe writing a letter saying, what about a sixth alternative like plant-based milk? Even just adding that and see what they say, right? Sometimes it starts with just a suggestion. And then if they say, oh, we could never do that, now you can maybe have some more conversations with other people to see if there's a way to compel such an action, But it's a process, and it begins by raising awareness and saying, wait a second, how about this? So I don't know, but then it also gets into power dynamics. Sometimes somebody does that and they might lose their job. So there's all these issues too. So you just got to kind of take it case by case. But
the level of continuous deprogramming.
It's continuous deprogramming, right? I remember a friend of mine, Jim Mason, I was talking to somebody about earlier. He talks about we're kids and we have this natural tendencies towards being empathetic with other animals, having kinship with other animals. And if you look at the course of human history, we used to be among other animals and we would be in awe of other animals. Like some of the cave drawings that have recently been looked at have animals in a much more kind of elevated position than once we started hunting and killing them. They started becoming a little different. But he talks about as humans grow up, we start becoming adulterated. We start losing this empathy, losing this connection, losing this kinship that we naturally, I think, have with other animals. And when you're with other animals in a positive way, that's good for everybody. As opposed, like visiting a sanctuary is so different than being at a slaughterhouse. I mean, it's palpably different, right? So, and I think most people would rather spend time at a sanctuary. So that's the kind of world we want to create, and that's really what Farm Sanctuary is about. It's about modeling these relationships with other animals as friends, not food, and just encouraging people to think critically about habits we have and ask ourselves, does this make sense? And then ultimately making choices that are aligned with our values and aligned with our interests. Because, now, don't tell me about factory farming, right? A lot of times people say that because it is upsetting. But wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to say, I don't want to know what I'm doing? You could actually do what you did and you felt good about it? Right, so that's another example of how I think there's this natural empathy that we shut off and we start rationalizing, and I think we do it really to our own demise ultimately when you look at the whole system, personally, but also more broadly. So,
I think you're done.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thanks for the birthday wishes too. That's very sweet, and the cake.
We didn't get cake. I'm sorry. We didn't make it out. Usually people don't all shut up. You just thank you.
Yes, we're off meeting.